So it's no secret that jerkbaits are a deadly springtime and cold water fishing lure. But which jerkbait should you actually be throwing, and how do you fish it? Let's discuss. Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Dishes and Fishes, where I show you how to cook and set hooks. A whopping 96% of the viewers of this channel are not subscribed, so do us both a favor. If you're into either instructional fishing videos or cooking videos, hit that subscribe button. I'm not going anywhere. Today we're talking about one of the most fun fishing lures to fish, and that is the jerkbait. So let's get into it. So there's a few different areas that you want to think about fishing when you're targeting either smallmouth or largemouth. For smallmouth, one of the main areas I try to target is areas with current like this, especially when the water temperature is in the 50s. Smallmouth tend to hang out in these areas, and if you catch one in an area with current like this, chances are there'll be several hanging out with it. Look for areas in the current where the current changes, if there's little eddies in the current, and they'll kind of sit there and wait for bait to drift by. Another great area for smallmouth are rocky flats. So once the smallmouth transition from these areas of deep water and they start moving into the spawn, they'll kind of go to these areas to feed where the bottom either changes suddenly, whether that's grass to rock. And I found that nice big flats, especially flats that have rocks on them, tend to hold a lot of smallies. When fishing a jerkbait for largemouth, the primary goal is to coax the largemouth out of cover. So I would try to find areas that have isolated structure, whether that's offshore rock piles, brush piles, even laydowns on the bank. You can kind of get the largemouth to come out with a good jerkbait. When you cast the jerkbait out, once it hits the water, you want to take a few cranks to get it to your desired depth. And there's different types of jerkbaits. Some will get to 3 to 5 feet, some will get to 6 to 9 feet, like the one I'm throwing. Some will get deeper. I would experiment with a few jerkbaits on a given day that the jerkbait bite is on and kind of see what depth that they're at. But always when you cast it out, give it a few cranks so it comes down into the water column and it's nice and straight. When you jerk the jerkbait, you really want to not be shy with the rod movement. You really got to kind of slap it like that. And another thing that you want to make sure you do, you'll notice I'm trying to keep the slack out of the line, because depending on the wind, you might be able to see the bite happen, but you want to leave yourself in a good position if you catch a fish, which is not a lot of slack out. So when I'm reeling the slack in, I don't want to disturb the movement of the jerkbait. I want the jerkbait to suspend. There's a few different things that you can kind of tweak when you're fishing jerkbaits in order to mix it up. The size and the depth that the jerkbait will go down, the color of the jerkbait. A lot of the times jerkbait is a sight fishing lure if you're fishing it in clear water. Not all the time. In the cadence that you work the jerkbait. The magic of fishing the jerkbait is in the pause. 95% of the time when you're fishing a jerkbait, the fish eat it when you pause. So mix up your cadence, whether that is 1, 2 jerks and a pause, fast jerks. You can do 3 jerks. I don't know if this is true, if it's just in my head, but one thing I've noticed is when I just do a single jerk and wait, I get a lot of bites that way. So don't underestimate the power of a good single jerk and wait. One in the mega bass. Now there's really only 2 colors of jerkbaits that I like to throw. Here in New England, the main types of forage, this time of year at least, are perch and these little things called alowives, which are silver and blue, as you can see. I don't know if they are semiparis, which means they die after they spawn, or why they're all dead. This jerkbait I'm throwing right now, you can see, is blue and silver to kind of look like that. I also like anything gold. It's also good to have a jerkbait in your arsenal that has a little bit of chartreuse for those cloudy, murky water days. It's a good mix-up as well. Let's talk about the gear that I use to throw a jerkbait. So I've been experimenting with different rods the last couple of weeks for this video, and I've figured out a few things. When it comes to the actual action of the rod, the bend of the rod, You want a rod that's either medium or medium heavy, and I kind of feel like it should be more on the medium side. You can see when I jerk this rod, it has a nice bend to it and it kind of absorbs the shock. If the rod is too stiff, what I found is that it'll jerk the bait, but it leaves you in kind of a bad position if you catch a fish. So if the rod has a little bit more spring to it, after I jerk the rod, I'm already in position if I catch a fish, and I can feel the bite pretty easily. If the rod's too stiff, I'll jerk it and there'll be slack in the line, and it just won't leave you in a good position, and you can miss bites that way. I have seen some guys online that like to throw jerk baits on spinning tackle, so I've been experimenting with that as well, and it works. And what I found is you need a heavier spinning rod. So one of the rods I talked about in my 4 rods under $100 video is a Berkeley lightning rod. A cheap $40 rod, has great backbone if you were to fish a jerkbait with it. Obviously you can't fish a jerkbait on like a hair jig or a finesse rod because it's not gonna give you the support. But one condition that I really recommend, if it's glass calm and there's no wind, fishing a jerkbait on a spinning rod is really nice because you can kind of take your time and really just make that bait look super, super natural. If I'm fishing on a day like this where it's windy, I'm fishing in a lot of current right now, I like to use the bait casting rod. It's just more powerful. I can whip it around pretty easily. But again, the most important thing is that the rod bends enough where it will leave you in a good position to catch a fish. There's 2 different line setups that I've been experimenting with as well the past few weeks. One is straight fluorocarbon, and the other one is braid to fluorocarbon. And right now I'm using straight fluorocarbon. This is 12-pound test. When I jerk it, it's noticeably stretchy. So it comes down to how it feels in your hand. I honestly like the feel of the braid to fluorocarbon leader better because when I jerk it, I can feel the bait much better with the braided line. I think it's more sensitive. But again, this is a bait that you're kind of slinging a lot. Fish crush it when they hit it. So you do run the risk of breaking your braided line to fluorocarbon leader attachment. The straight fluorocarbon like I'm doing is way safer. I think the braided line to fluorocarbon is more sensitive and feels better. It comes down to personal preference, but those are both 2 good options. And for my braided setup, I use 15-pound braid to 12-pound fluoro, and this is just 12-pound fluoro straight up. The springtime is obviously a great time of year to fish a jerkbait. It seems to excel once that water temperature hits in the 50s, for bass at least. I talked about in a few other videos how you can catch pike when the water's in the high 30s and 40s. They don't seem to care. But for bass, that magic number seems to be in the 55-degree range. That's when it is on. So let's talk about the topic of concern in this video. Does jerkbait brand actually matter? And for me, the answer is yes, it does matter, especially in very high pressured lakes like the one I'm fishing today. There seems to be something with the more expensive jerkbaits. I don't know whether it's the action underwater, the more natural looking paint schemes, but in my experience, I've fished with guys who were throwing cheaper and more expensive jerkbaits than I was. And that Megabass jerkbait seems to really excel. I don't understand why, but it does. And for $25, it's hard to pull the trigger. So I definitely would recommend buying 1 or 2 just to have it and taking your good old time tying knots so you don't lose them. Another jerkbait that I found works pretty good is this one I'm throwing now. It's called Loco Special by 13 Fishing. And I've also had luck with the 6 Cents model. Both the Loco Special and the 6 Cents run you about 15 bucks. But on lakes where there's not a lot of fishing pressure, it doesn't matter the brand or the price. So a simple Strike King jerkbait in blue and chrome or in gold is gonna catch you fish. Let's talk about modifications that you can do to the jerkbait to kind of set yourself apart. I mentioned how jerkbait fishing is sometimes largely a sight fishing bait. Fish see it, but in murky water, jerkbaits still make a lot of noise. They still have rattles in them. But if you're fishing a pretty highly frequented lake, everybody's throwing a jerkbait. So one thing I like to do is throw a Megabass silent jerkbait. Doesn't have any ball bearings in it, doesn't make any noise underwater, just to kind of try to make mine stand out when everybody's throwing the same kind of jerkbaits that make a lot of rattle underwater. Another modification that you can do is add a little tiny spinnerbait blade on the back of a jerkbait. We found that this works well, especially for pike fishing, but it's another good thing to try to kind of make your jerkbait stand out when everybody on the lake is throwing it. Another thing that you can do to make your jerkbait stand out is modify the hooks. You definitely want to take a look at the jerkbait next to the boat and just see how it sits in the water column. Sometimes they'll fall forward, they'll fall back. So I like to keep a bunch of Gamakatsu treble hooks on board, and I'll swap this middle one out if the jerkbait is floating. And oftentimes if I just put one of those heavier treble hooks on the middle, it'll hold the jerkbait in the water column nice and straight and suspend. But just changing one of the hooks out can make it sit more comfortably in the water column. Definitely don't put the jerkbait down in the summer either. I've caught into July here in New England at least, and I've caught them in the fall. So it's definitely a bait that can work all year, but it has most of its success in the springtime for sure. So that's it, guys. One of the funnest lures to fish year round, especially in the spring and when those water temperatures are in the 50s. So give it a try yourself, comment if you do, and as always, thanks for watching.